The first alarm sounded at dawn, when the violet suns of Kelries had barely risen above the palace spires. They were not the sharp, shrieking alarms of invasion, but the low, resonant hum reserved for internal emergencies, betrayal, disappearance, threats that came from within. Servants froze mid-step. Guards stiffened, gripping their electrospears. Somewhere deep in the heart of the palace, Queen Shareth of the Varelian Dominion felt the vibration pass through the marble floor and into her bones. Her daughters were gone. Shareth stood in the hall of echoed stars, her long mantle of living silk trailing behind her as she turned slowly, fury and terror warring behind her luminous eyes. The twins, Lyri and Salis, were not merely her children. They were heirs, symbols, living proof of the fragile peace between the Varelians and the outer systems. And now, on the very day foreign delegates filled her palace, they had vanished. "Lock down the eastern wing," Shareth commanded, her voice cold enough to silence the chamber. "Seal every corridor. Search every room. No one leaves the palace." Her advisors bowed and scattered. The palace, a vast structure grown rather than built, responded instantly. Walls shifted, doors sealed, biolights dimmed and flared as security protocols activated. Outside, the city of Kelries shimmered unaware, its floating avenues alive with color and sound. Inside, suspicion spread like a toxin. The first whispers named the obvious culprit, the human. He had arrived 3 days earlier, alone, unarmed, and entirely out of place. Elias Ward, Terran envoy, technical specialist, and, according to some, a calculated risk taken by a queen who believed understanding was stronger than fear. Humans were still a mystery to most Varelians, short-lived, soft-bodied, emotionally erratic, and yet stubbornly resilient. Elias had been given modest quarters in the western wing, far from the royal nurseries and ceremonial chambers. Or so everyone thought. As guards swept through the palace, Shareth paced, her talons clicking against the floor. Memories of the twins flooded her mind. Lyri's curiosity, forever asking questions about stars beyond their charts. Salis's fierce protectiveness, already thinking like a ruler despite her young cycles. The idea of them frightened, hurt, or worse twisted Shareth's heart with a pain no crown could shield. "Your Majesty," said High Guard Captain Relan, kneeling before her. His scales were dulled with stress. "There are no signs of forced entry into the royal wing. No biosigns indicating struggle." Shareth's eyes narrowed. Then they left willingly, or with someone they trusted. The unspoken thought hung heavy between them. The search intensified. Servants were questioned. Advisors scrutinized. Delegates confined to their quarters. One by one, wings of the palace were cleared. Empty rooms, silent corridors, nothing but rising dread. With each report, Shareth's control frayed. Then a young guard hesitated outside the hall, his crest twitching nervously. "Speak," Shareth snapped. "My queen, the western wing has not yet been searched. The humans' quarters remain sealed, per protocol." The hall went still. For a heartbeat, Shareth could not move. The western wing, the farthest point from her daughter's chambers. The place she had considered least relevant, least dangerous. "Open it," she said softly. Relan's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "Your Majesty, if my daughters are harmed," Shareth interrupted, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper, "there will be no corner of this galaxy where he can hide. Open the door." The guards moved as one, weapons raised, formations tight. The corridor to the western wing felt longer than it was, its organic walls pulsing faintly, as if sensing the tension. At the end stood a simple door, unadorned, marked only by a Terran symbol Elias had requested be placed there, a circle intersected by a line, meaning something about home. Rielan raised a claw. The door unsealed with a soft hiss. What they found inside did not match any fear Sharath had imagined. The room was warm, lights dimmed to a gentle amber glow. Terran fabrics lay folded neatly on one side, Varelian cushions arranged carefully on the other. And in the center, atop a broad sleeping mat, lay Queen Sharath's daughters. Lyri was asleep, curled against a pillow that Elias had clearly fashioned from spare blankets. Celes lay beside her, one arm protectively draped over her sister, her breathing slow and even. Between them sat Elias Ward, back against the wall, eyes half-closed but instantly alert as the guards flooded in. He raised his hands slowly, palms open. "Easy," he said, his voice calm, tired. "You're going to wake them." For a moment, no one moved. Sharath stepped forward, disbelief crashing into relief so intense it nearly buckled her knees. Her daughters were alive, unharmed, peaceful. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, though the edge in her voice trembled. Elias looked up at her, really looked, and something like regret crossed his face. "They came to me," he said simply. "I didn't take them." Weapons snapped up at once. "They left their guards," Rielan growled. "Bypass security. That is impossible without assistance." Celes stirred at the raised voices. Her eyes fluttered open, sharp and aware even in sleep's aftermath. "Mother," she murmured. Sharath was at her side in an instant, kneeling, brushing a clawed hand gently along Celes's crest. "I am here, my heart." Lyri woke next, blinking in confusion before breaking into a relieved smile. "You found us." Sharath pulled them both into her arms, breathing them in, feeling their warmth. Only when she was certain they were real did she look back at Elias. "Explain," she said, her tone no longer furious, but dangerously controlled. Elias nodded. "Last night, they were wandering near the observation gardens, crying. No guards in sight. I thought they were lost. When I approached, they recognized me." "They shouldn't know you well enough to trust you," Rielan said. Lyri bristled. "We do." All eyes turned to her. "He listens," Lyri continued. "Everyone else talks at us. Elias listens. He doesn't tell us what we are supposed to be." Celes sat up straighter. "We were scared," she added quietly. The dreams came back. Sharath's breath caught. The dreams, visions of war, collapse, futures Sharath herself had once seen as a young queen. She had hoped to spare her daughters that burden for a few more cycles. "You came here because?" Sharath asked. "Because he's human," Celes said. "And humans aren't part of our future visions yet. We thought maybe he could help us understand." Elias swallowed. "They asked me to read to them," he said. "A Terran story. About stars and people who choose their own paths." They fell asleep. I stayed. I didn't want to risk moving them and causing panic. Silence filled the room. Sharath studied the human, this small, fragile being who sat unarmed in the center of her palace, accused of the gravest crime imaginable, yet guilty of nothing more than compassion. "You should have alerted the guards," she said. "I know," Elias replied. "I was afraid they'd be dragged back before they were ready. I thought maybe if they slept, I could explain in the morning." Sharath rose slowly. For a long moment, no one knew what judgment would fall. Then she did something no one expected. She inclined her head. "You protected my daughters," she said. "You respected their fear, their choices. That is not a crime." Rielan stiffened. "Your Majesty, the fault is ours," Sharath continued, her gaze sweeping the room. "For building a palace so vast that children can feel alone within it. for assuming guards can replace trust. She turned back to Elias. But understand this, human. The lives of my daughters are not yours to risk. I understand, Elias said quietly. The tension eased, though it did not vanish. The twins were escorted back to their chambers, surrounded not by guards, but by their mother's arms. As they left, Leary looked back. Will you visit us again? She asked. Elias smiled, small and genuine. If your mother allows it. Sharath paused, then nodded once. You will be welcome, she said. Under my roof. Under my watch. In the days that followed, the incident rippled through the Dominion. Some called for Elias's removal. Others whispered that the human had done what no advisor or warrior could, reach the royal heirs as people, not symbols. Sharath listened to them all, weighing fear against possibility. When Elias eventually stood before her in the Hall of Echoed Stars, summoned not as a suspect, but as a guest, the palace felt different, less rigid, more alive. My daughters speak of you often, Sharath said. They ask questions I had hoped they would not face so soon. Elias met her gaze. They're going to be remarkable leaders, he said. But they're still kids. Even Queen's daughters need someone to tell them stories sometimes. Sharath allowed herself a rare smile. Perhaps, she said, that is what this alliance truly requires. And so the human remained, not as a prisoner, nor merely an envoy, but as something entirely unexpected. A bridge, a listener, a reminder that even in a palace of power, the safest place for frightened children could be a quiet room, a shared story, and a stranger kind enough to stay awake so they didn't have to face their fears alone. Long after the alarms faded into memory, the tales spread across systems, how the palace was searched, how suspicion nearly sparked tragedy, and how the Queen's daughters were found not in chains or shadows, but asleep, safe, in the room of a human who never meant to change history, yet somehow did. The incident should have ended there. That was what the council believed, what the palace records would later claim. A misunderstanding resolved, a security lapse corrected, a human envoy quietly monitored. Life within the palace resumed its rhythms. Ceremonial banners fluttered once more. Delegations departed. The alarms became history. But for Queen Sharath, nothing truly returned to what it had been. She began to notice the changes first in the smallest moments. Leary no longer clung to her tutor's words as absolute truth. She questioned star charts. She asked why borders existed in space that had no walls. Salies, once rigid and controlled, began spending long hours in the public halls, listening to citizens rather than observing them from elevated balconies. And both of them, always inevitably, asked when they could visit Elias again. At first, Sharath resisted. She told herself it was caution. She told herself it was protocol. Yet deep within her, another truth whispered. Her daughters had seen something in the human that she herself had forgotten how to look for. So she compromised. Elias was permitted supervised visits. No guards in the room, but watchers beyond the walls. No political discussions. No questions about succession. Only stories, games, and conversation. And yet, those quiet hours changed more than any council decree ever had. Elias never spoke to the twins about ruling. He spoke to them about choosing, about mistakes, about worlds that failed because leaders believed they already had all the answers. He told them of Earth, not as a triumphant species, but as a flawed one that survived by learning, painfully and repeatedly. Sharath watched from a distance. She saw her daughters laugh more freely. She saw them sleep without nightmares. She saw, with growing unease, that they were becoming something new, something that could not be controlled by tradition alone. The breaking point came 6 cycles later. An extremist faction within the Dominion, the Purity Choir, moved openly at last. They declared humans an existential contaminant. They accused Sharath of weakening the bloodline, of allowing alien sentiment to infect the heirs. Their demand was simple. The human must leave, or he would be removed. The council chamber was filled beyond capacity when Elias was brought before it, not in chains, but under armed escort. He stood straight, hands clasped behind his back, fully aware that this time, kindness might not be enough. Sharath listened as voices rose, sharp and venomous. He bypassed royal security. He compromised the heirs. He represents a species unbound by foresight. Finally, she raised her hand. Silence fell. "You fear him," she said calmly. "Not because he is dangerous, but because he is different. Because he showed my daughter something none of you have." She turned to Elias. "Human," she asked, "if I order you to leave this world forever, will you obey?" Elias didn't hesitate. Yes. The answer surprised them all. "Why?" Sharath pressed. "Because your daughters don't belong to me," he said. "They belong to the future. And if my presence puts that at risk, then leaving is the right choice." Before the council could react, two small figures stepped forward. Leary and Saley stood side by side, no guards pulling them back. "No," Saley said, her voice steady. "That's the wrong choice." Leary lifted her chin. "You taught us that the future isn't protected by fear. It's built by trust." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Sharath felt something ancient shift inside her. The weight of every queen before her pressing, then lifting. She rose. "The Purity Choir is dissolved," she declared. "Any who move against this decree will be exiled beyond Dominion space." The chamber erupted, but she did not stop. Elias Ward will remain. Not as an envoy. Not as a guest. She looked at him, her eyes luminous. But as a guardian of perspective, a role newly created, beyond bloodlines and prophecy. The title echoed, strange and unprecedented. Elias bowed his head, overwhelmed. "I don't deserve that." Sharath stepped closer. "None of us ever do," she said. "That is why it matters." Years later, when historians would speak of the moment the Dominion truly changed, they would not mark it by treaties or wars. They would speak of a night when a palace was searched in fear, and what was found instead. 2 daughters asleep, a human keeping watch, and a queen who chose trust over tradition. And in that choice, the future quietly, irrevocably shifted.